I am Marshall Millett, and I am an archaeologist, although I don't go to, AA meetings very much. But how many of you actually have met an archaeologist or could define what we really do? You see archaeologists out there. This special lady knows very, very well what archaeologist does, but anybody else specifically to maybe urban environments or cultural preservation? Any ideas where an archaeologist fits into sort of a modern community landscape? I can tell you that then. So professionally here in the States we have a law called Section 106. And Section 106 is an environmental law that says we want to manage our resources, we want to evaluate them, we want to decide if they're important to us as cultural resources. So to be a cultural resource, you go out there in the middle of nowhere, you identify it, so we're walking, we're doing survey, and you find it, and then once you have it, you have to document it, right? But that's happening everywhere. So it happens here in the city all the time, whenever you lay a new pipeline, whenever you lay new electricity, whenever you're trying to decide if you're tearing something important down. So in context of what a modern archaeologist does, that's pretty much it. As far as what I've done, it involves a lot of observation, documentation of a lot of trash, a lot of old things that nobody cares about, but you have to decide whether they're important or not. And then there's more documentation, even of glass trash. And then there's more documentation of bricks. So there's a lot of documentation, and a lot of measuring, and a lot of pictures, and a lot of writing as well. So what's the purpose of all this? Well, hopefully it's for social sharing at the end of the day. You're conveying a history, you're conveying purpose to something that no longer exists, and you're representing that story of objects to people so that they can begin to conceptualize through a temporal understanding. So what's important to me is the future of sharing. And we're living in a world where we're sharing everything. And we're pretty okay with that. And we're moving to a place where, what does it mean to share something? So, what I got into when I was writing all of these resources down, you get out in the field, and you find something, and you put a tape measure up to it, and you write it down paragraph form. How does that actually convey what that object is? This is an old site record. This is a Petroglyph Site up in Khyber's Flat outside of Truckee. If you go about an hour north of Truckee, California, and you take a little dirt road and you drive another hour, and then you get out of the dirt road and then you walk another hour, you find this petroglyph. Well, this is what it used to look like. This is what it was assumed to look like after John Betts, archaeologist and artist, put it together. And you basically get this kind of star field looking pitted boulder. But this is what it looks like today because it was bulldozed. During the mining and the logging rush that was sort of grew out of doing mining, early loggers destroyed the site. They hit it, they impact it, and now it's pushed into a pile of rocks. So what John tried to do was put it all together and give us a better picture of what it really means. And then what I want to do, so what I wanted to do was go to the next level. Instead of actually writing this down on paper, I wanted to share object experience. So I got into 3D documentation. 3D documentation is a process of collecting either scan information from LiDAR, structured light, photogrammetry, RTI, reflective transformation, imaging, and putting it all together. And I ended working with some folks at UC Davis, and they have what's called a cave. Is anyone familiar with a cave system? So a computer augmented or assisted virtual environment. And these have been questionable for the last 10 years of what their utility is, what their value is. Oh, there's latency and I feel sick. Sort of these problems that come with experiencing data as virtual data. But we're now moving into a place where virtual reality is becoming more prevalent. In fact, it's commercialized. And you have things, well, let me skip back. So this was, we're fine here? So this was some of my trial exercises. So what I wanted to focus on was not just the rock art itself, but the entire environment, entire experience. So I went out and I combined all methods of 3D scanning I could possibly get my hands on: aerial LiDAR, terrestrial LiDAR, structured light, photogrammetry, and put it all together into one package. And that enabled us to explore the entire environment. So I put together some trial experiences where we walked the local California tribes through their sites. And the questions became, what does it mean to do this? If you're archiving a digital representation of a full environment, of a sacred site, where does this take us? So very interesting conversations, and we're continuing to do work. We're definitely working for resources that are being destroyed, that you can't avoid. But it's becoming commoditized where you don't need a cave. Now you can share experiences all across the web. So the real question is, what is the future of internet? What is the future of interaction? So this is what I see as digital object culture. So before, I think we froze. Very sad. So, digital object culture. I don't know if any of you have seen Google's kind of newest foray in computer vision, Project Tango. So Tango was an initiative to put a depth sensor on a mobile phone and also solve some of the world's hardest computer vision problems, including self-localization mapping. And what this technology does, what they're advertising, is mapping and measuring all this metrology. And as someone who spent almost 10 years doing a lot of measuring, a lot of metrology out in the middle of nowhere, the value isn't about what that data is, it's about the experience we get from these objects. So I see a place where we're moving from the ability for anyone to scan anything. And we're going to replace photography the way we know it. We're building the new media platform, where instead of sharing a picture of my food, I'm scanning my food. And someone can turn it around and explore that object. They can have access to the objects as if they were really there. And that's the next foray into what media is going to become, and it's already here. So some of the questions I want to produce are, how do we, let's see if we can, so what I imagine is not just objects, right? Not just food. What you can do is build an array of depth cameras. They'll understand where they are in space, and you can port it real time. You can collect me on stage as objects and play it through the internet. Now you can manipulate and share those spaces, those experiences. So the internet will de-evolve from a place of static O'Reilly Media 2D layers and screens into something where we're interfacing with digital data real time. And it's already here. I have some videos I'd love to show you. But I saw this about 2 years ago, so I actually left some of my archaeology fieldwork, working for BLM, for the Forest Service, all across the United States and even across the world, to move here to basically technology and lasso it up and start talking about what it's going to mean when we're sharing complete environments, complete people as 3D experiences. So archaeology is evolving because we're having all this information. And then the next archaeologist will really be a hacker who goes through and measures things digitally all across the board. But the fun part is thinking about the utility of this. Is this something to fear? Are we having privacy issues if we can capture this entire room and not just share it as video, but share it as a video game that people are walking through in their Oculus Rifts? What kind of experiences are we okay to give up, and what kind of experiences do we want to digitize for value? So I've been thinking about this a lot, and I'm a big proponent that there's a huge advantage to the human experience by sharing those cultural experiences. So one of the prime examples, actually, I was just speaking today. So I have a couple people ask me a couple questions. If you have this technology, what would be the main thing you'd capture? It's the thing I walk around every day asking, what would you scan? Because I'm trying to convince people, hey, there's a value in scanning. But my phone's so easy. Well, now it's really easy on your Google Tango or whatever Apple's going to come up with next with PrimeSense involved. So if it's just as easy to 3D scan something and share that, we're going to end up probably moving in that direction. So a couple questions are, what would you scan? And then where's the real utility? So for me, there's two things. It was the work in the caves that brought me to work on motion capture. Because they would completely swim through all these 3D environments and fly through it and look at it from above and they go, this is cool. It's like, well, but we need to capture our elders. We need to capture people who know a language that is dying. We want to record people speaking. As simple as that. We want to record basket weaving, traditional arts. And at the time, 3 years ago, I said, well, that's really not possible. And then the reality is it is possible. And resolution is pretty much a linear solution now. So the next level is what those shared experiences do. And I throw around some words like resilience every once in a while, and whether this can tie into resilience. So as someone who, my work was geographic information systems, what I see is this as media. You have virtual media, and you're going to plug media into an information system. So it's not virtual reality, it's basically media information reality. And you're going to be able to go back in time, record spaces, and put on your glasses and see what was here in this room 10 minutes ago through a controlled system. But I think the ultimate will be giving people access to experiences they didn't have. If you have a bucket list in your world, right? Places to travel. I was a very dramatic traveler until I started getting interested in what is the future of education and the future of technology. And now I'm focused on building this technology because there's some kind of idea in my head that if there's 10,000 places I have to visit before I die, and the reality is I won't make it to those 10,000 places, let's pop up a virtual experience, and then my bucket list is like 5,000 real experiences and 5,000 virtual experiences. So I'm trying to make that happen quicker rather than later, because then my numbers go up. But it's also about people who are digital diasporas, right? So think of communities that have actually been exiled from places that they used to use. And this happens in California more than you'd ever think. 144 language groups and about 120 local tribal organizations that were displaced after 1849. Land access and access issues to recording and documenting resources is really challenging because they don't own the land anymore. But if they can capture a sacred space to them and have it virtually, can they reenact and connect with the landscape and the places that they understood through those means? So on large scale, being able to port spaces, but also future of work. So if you have experts who are limited, if you have healthcare where you have open heart surgery and you can actually contribute about 10 experts across the United States all at one time who can freely explore around that space and give input based on their visual experience. So that's essentially what I'm trying to ask and trying to explore and solve that problem. I think that's all the time I have. Yeah.
You went over a couple minutes.
Okay. All right. That's it. Any questions?
If there's any questions, or go ahead. He's got time.
Yes, sir.
So, if you were today given, a budget and asked to record like a human interaction, right, for them to record this talk in this room, how would you actually do it?
So my field work led me to actually a couple patents in doing this. So one of the neat things about Tango, if you look into the development kit, and I mentioned is self-localization mapping. So you can use really, there's issues of coverage and data shadows that you get, but with about 4 cameras, you can capture all the angles that you really need. And it's a matter of combining those coordinate systems, communicating those depth live streams, and just aligning them. And things, computer vision problems such as SLAM help us do that very easily. So what I imagine is basically we all have our phones, we take them out, and if we decide, we click into Google Talk, and now it's porting our individual phone data, but you can grab the whole space.
And with enough phones sort of positioned around the room, right? And like just like people standing in the phones, or even like walking around with the phones,
Yep.
right? You can just get the
Yeah, this is very much like how whales communicate. This sonar, this idea of even candles in the dark, right? Lanterns in the dark. So the world is kind of this dark 3D space, and then our cameras turn on and they capture it. It's just a matter of making sure those cameras communicate together. But we also see products that you're buying, chandelier type of arrangement. You hang it, and with 3 nodes, you can easily capture the entire space. And we can do it with enough bandwidth that we can do it live on virtual machines through the internet. Please.
To what extent do you worry about how this technology could be employed in authoritarian states for surveillance purposes beyond just standard video cameras everywhere from that?
Yeah, so one of my questions, it's kind of insane to be a modern archaeologist. And I was around, it's almost as symbolic as it is fiction. I was around the round table with the tribes when I first presented what I wanted to do in scope. And one of the first questions is the data sacred? And originally, no. It's just on a computer and you're exploring it. But one of the museum curators said, well, what if this encourages them to run around the park and actually go up and touch the resource in the way they're not supposed to? And for me, I was like, no, that's exactly not the point. The point is it's digital, so now you can explore it. But it's a valid question, a valid concern of how much we're separating reality from this virtual kind of digital object culture. So I think what it comes down to is managing privacy correctly. There's a group in Berkeley, Marugu it's called, but it's a social sharing platform that involves steps. So what they did is study about 3 different cultures and how people actually share data. And if my grandfather dies, everyone's really quiet. No one talks about all the information that surrounds my grandfather. So what this system does is recognize that, and all the photos that are involved or tagged about grandfather lock down. And you can see them, but no one can talk about them, or maybe you can't see them. There's all these rules for sharing that they invoke. And I think that's what this has to approach, because this is much more visceral, much more real. You're going to see objects, and we have to figure out how to move that landscape, because we're definitely doing it already. And organizations, you can even get depth data out of regular pictures. So we're sharing all this information, and it's the same question, I think, as today. Where are we going with sharing? How do we protect privacy? Is it a real thing? Did privacy really exist in nature? So prior, how did it exist in these different groups? But that's exactly the concern. Is I think this will happen anyway. How are we going to approach it? Well, I think I've taken all my time. Thanks, Hess.